watching, the watcher's watching me. Cameras spinning, eyes, no place to be free. High towers whisper to the ground below. Promises broken where the taxes grow. CSI watchdogs sniff the trail, follow the lies where the big dogs fail. Truth uncovered, corruption's face. Tear down the mask in the shadow place. Tear down the mask in the shadow place.
Well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate y'all coming in. So there's some new things learning that's possible and might not be possible, who knows? But Mitchell, of course, led the charge on FLOST and L-Host, and there's a lot of things different happening. And it seems like there's a lot of different words getting out, who thinks what, and kind of a little gossip triangle. So I figured the best way to do it is put everybody in the same room, let's hear it all at the same time, and that way we can each go back to our respective boards and make decisions for the best of the citizens we serve, which is our job, regardless of what it entails. Now, I do want to remind everybody, even if somebody just falls in love with the FLOST, it is up to the citizens of the county to decide whether or not they want it. It is not our choice, it is their choice. That is one thing I do like, is it's their choice, but that's where the power really needs to be. But there is a lot of dynamics. We've got Ms. Vaughn here with us today, and a lot of you remember Alicia McCaffrey, she's in the role she's at, so she's kind of the president expert at ACCG on the FLOST matters, and thank you for being here. So, one thing I'd like to do is just start and everybody go around the room, and we assume that everybody knows everybody, but frankly, there's some faces we might not remember. I'm Chairman of the Board of Commissioners, Stephen Henry, and Judge, would you like to lead us on?
Chuck Harris, District 2 Commissioner.
Jeff Long, District 1 Commissioner.
Chad Young, County Attorney.
Dan Wright, County Manager.
Ashley O'Donnell, Chief of Appraisers for the Board of Assessors.
Molly Hughes, City Manager, Fort Oglethorpe. Kathy Bradley, City Clerk, Director, City of Ringgold.
Phil Vinson, Finance Director of the City of Fort Oglethorpe.
Derek Rogers, City Council, Fort Oglethorpe.
Jim Chow, City Council, Fort Oglethorpe.
Austin Carter, Director of Finance for the school system.
Renzo Wiggins, School Board Attorney.
Chance Nick, Superintendent.
Dave Lloyd, District 4 Representative for the chair.
Mitchell Walker.
I'm sorry.
That was a good one.
No, we will intend, I promise.
Mitchell Horner, State Representative, District 3.
Steve Garvin, State Representative, District 1.
Steve, that's not a good way to start. I mean, seriously.
I'm Susan Gibson. I'm the at-large citizen Board of Education and the Vice Chair.
I'm Gary Jefferson, Board Member for District 2.
Lori Hunt, Board Member, District 1.
Dina Reeves, Board of Education, District 3.
Kelly Bowman, Mayor, City of Ringgold. Laura Henderson, Vice Mayor, City of Ringgold.
Randall Franks, Councilman for City of Ringgold.
Mickey Lundey, City Clerk, City of Ringgold.
Mark Vaughn, City Manager, City of Ringgold.
Sarah Clark, City of Ringgold.
Rhonda Swaney, City of Ringgold.
I'm Alicia Vaughn. I work for the Association of County Commissioners in Georgia, otherwise known as ACCG, because of the acronyms and local government. And I appreciate the board for inviting me to be here today.
And Richard Dark, District 3 Commissioner. And Charlie.
Charlie Stevens, District 4.
Mayor Gray, we want to tell everybody who you are, like you need an introduction.
Earl Gray, Mayor.
Fort Oglethorpe, not Ringgold.
What makes you do that?
Y'all ride together? So y'all the car folks? Not good. We had to just send out a notice, and y'all don't know where to go. So one thing I want to point out before I turn it over to Mitchell is this is not normal that all four governments can get together in one room without killing each other. So I want to thank everybody for being here, because we take a lot for granted in our community that other communities don't get into. So I want to thank each of you for being here. We might not always agree, but I think we always respect each other. I appreciate that out each of you. And at this time, I'm gonna just turn it over to Mitchell, because, you know, frankly, this is, Mitchell's baby, and I'm trying to learn it just like y'all are. So that's why I want us all here at the same time and hear the same thing. And don't, we're setting like this because we sent the presentation once. We want to make sure y'all are able to see it on the big screen. Jeff, this is your first time, so you're just gonna watch the TV. So stare at them. And by the way, Steve, Mitchell, thank you for taking the time to be here. I appreciate it very much.
First, I want to say thank you to Chairman Henry and county commissioners for setting this up. It took a lot of time and effort to get everybody in the same room, and that's not gone unlooked. So I want to thank everybody for showing up. We've talked to every single entity about this idea over the last couple of weeks. How the idea kind of came to fruition was because of special session. We all wanted outposts. We all signed and said that we wanted outposts in some way, shape, or form. We put it to a vote, and the minority party decided in their wisdom not to allow it to pass through homestead requirements, which is 2/3 of the vote. There we tried negotiation with the minority leader countless times. They would not give separate votes. They would not give single votes. They would not see one outpost across the finish line. It was a matter of principle to them, in disagreement to the policy, not in disagreement to any local entity. But that being said, it does affect our local entities, and it affects how we have to look at the political landscape as well as what we're trying to achieve. Over the last couple of months, many at this table have wanted to, in some way, shape, or form, lower or exempt property taxes or end property taxes on your home. Frankly, we're never going to get rid of all property taxes. That's not the goal. The goal is to have somehow, shape, or form provide relief on your home from the ever-increasing property taxes due to federal, state, and local issues. So that being said, me, Chairman of Ways and Means, Shaw Blackman, and others in the state have talked, we've discussed, we've tried to build other models that would work for specific counties to make sure that we can, in some way, shape, or form, push local homestead relief. And that being said, I came up with their help, this idea, which is FLOST through other mechanisms, a back door to elbows, basically. And all of this is negotiable, all of this is compromisable. It's all in agreement to what each of these entities decide. Nothing is fixed in stone, but the baseline idea will be presented today. So the baseline idea is very simple. A 1% FLOST, floating local option sales tax. It's a 1% sales tax on all services in the county, not including some medicine, legal services, and services of that sort, just consumption on the what you buy in the store, basically. With that revenue, we are given a bucket of money from the taxpayer of almost $17 million, and it's up to these entities to decide how to distribute that and who should receive that property tax relief. That's the question. The basic question we're trying to provide is how can we move this money to offset property taxes, and why sales tax? Why sales tax? Because Catoosa County is in a very rare opportunity. Catoosa County sits on Highway 75, and based on other counties around us, we have about a 40% larger sales tax base than we do property taxes and other forms of taxation. Sales tax is a benefit to our citizens because it will lower your average tax to almost 40%. So that being said, let's start through this. The decision before you is very simple. FLOST or LHOST. As your sitting representatives, I do not believe that unless the Republicans win the governorship and win the House and win the Senate, and win the House and Senate with overwhelming constitutional majorities, LHOST will be a very hard sell to get across the finish line. They have made it a political principle to kill these things. It's not based on any other idea or reason other than they do not want, and we've been told this, rural voters to turn out in November. And frankly, election cycles will continue. So that's just the political reality. I would love LHOST. I don't see LHOST as a political viable opportunity at this moment. And frankly, I don't want to flip a coin to see if we get to that point, because it would be at least 2 years before an LHOST could be implemented due to the failure of the November ballot. So, first plan would be a FLOST or LHOST. So the difference between a FLOST and an LHOST. An LHOST is a tax that goes towards your homesteads first, and then lowers all other property taxes equally after that. What a FLOST does is it lowers everything equally across the board. FLOST was our first creation from after we've talked here. The ACCG helped us very much in the capital to pass FLOST and House Bill 581, so thank you for that. And what it allowed us to do is to lower property tax across the board equally. We came back last year and was able to barely to get LCOS across the finish line. But as we saw through special session, the local bills that LCOS requires could not get across. So what this plan does is we go back to the FLOST idea. We lower everything equally. But many here again want to provide targeted relief to our homesteaders. So how you can do that is through homestead exemptions. You provide either a full homestead exemption or some mechanism of that nature. You take your homestead exemptions completely off the digest, then you use that one sales tax to lower everything else equally. At the same time, I talked to Ashley's office a lot on this issue. We're able to completely reinvent all our exemption codes and streamline the lot of exemption codes that we have. I think we have almost 40 exemption codes on this current system. So it's able to streamline it into one simple system across the board. And of course, it does require an IGA of how these entities agree or talk about it to get to the final step. So what would a 1 cent sales tax bring in? Roughly, based on Rachel's numbers and the county's numbers, it's about $17.2 million is what is currently on track for the 2026 sales tax revenue year. And so this is the importance of looking at homesteads versus property taxes. Property taxes in general are about $45 to $50 million once you attach all the entities and all their property tax allowance onto it. You'll never get there with one penny, as we can see. But homesteads, if we focus on homesteads, it's about 30 to 40% of the tax digest base. So for the county, it's $5.7 million, roughly for your homesteads. It's 0.4 for the City of Ringgold, and it's 0.6 for the City of Fort Oglethorpe. So if we take this giant pot of money, $17.2 million, which is the local taxpayers providing us in sales taxes and provision, it's how do we distribute it? That's the big question. So distribution can occur in many different ways. What we're trying to do here is focus on homesteaders first. So it goes from 17 million, we get distributed out, and it provides roughly a 23% property tax reduction for all commercial spaces, and roughly a 22% homestead reduction for most homestead properties. You're asking, well, what's the difference? The difference is most of the commercial spaces are in city limits. So because you're going to have a reduction of city taxes and a reduction of county taxes, commercial spaces are going to see more of a, on average, I mean, average being spoken at, of a reduction than even your homesteader, just even based off these county changes. And the reason why I wanted to bring the school board today is each entity does not operate in a vacuum. When people get their homestead tax bill, they don't ask who's taxing, they ask how much it goes up. They ask what is the amount at the bottom of the bill. They don't ask mill rates, they don't ask percentages of increases, they ask how much am I paying this year on my taxes. We do not operate on a vacuum. We are all legally separate, we all have different responsibilities, but that means at the end of the day, the taxpayer just cares what they're paying. And so if we relieve them with a 1 cent sales tax, but another entity steps up and takes half of that tax base, it's not going to provide the targeted relief we're trying to do. And so we have to look at this as a full picture of how can we provide targeted relief to where we're trying to provide targeted relief. And that's the real conversation I'm trying to have today, is who do we want to provide relief to, how do we want to do it, and what mechanism can we create to do that. Now, many of us ran on getting on that homesteader position, so homesteads was the focus of this proposal. So that being said, I wish it was a little bigger, but basically, the county property tax M&O is $16.3 million. That's your entire property tax for this year. With $17.2 million, depending on distribution. Distribution for FLOST is based on FLOST numbers. So again, we focused on getting rid of these primary numbers, which is $5.7 million for the county, 0.4 for the City of Ringgold, and 0.6 for the City of Fort Oglethorpe. This would end homestead properties in all the cities and in the county, and replace that revenue so you can keep those services that are vital to each of your entities. So, that being said, we based it off that LPOS number. So this would be your allotment from basically our LPOS calculations. What this also does is because we're reducing property taxes in general, we're roughly 23% across the board. So now we've talked about the bucket of money, $17 million distributed to the county, cities, and how it's lowered it from the homestead. But it still lowers 23% off of property reductions on commercial spaces. It allows the opportunity for the school board to come in and say, we could do a full homestead exemption, and we can talk about the parameters in a second, we have a whole slide for that. But the school system could come in, do a full homestead exemption, and then take that 23% and it'd be basically neutral across the county. Some portions of the cities would actually see a still reduction of about 10% for commercial spaces, just because of those double taxes of the city and the county in the know. So the school could come in and your revenue would stay the same or would increase with inflation, and that's where these numbers come from. These are the 2028 numbers of when this would be implemented. But it's basically, we have the $17 million. How can we offset the $5.7 million on the homestead, $0.4 million in Ringgold, $0.5 in Fort Oglethorpe, and I have the numbers for the school. It's roughly what is left. So it is completely equal. And we can talk about that in just a second. So what is the process? The process is the FLOST goes onto the ballot in November. That's why we're on a time crunch. If we're going to put something on the ballot, it has to be to Rebecca at the elections office by August 5th. We're on August 4th. We're on a very tight time crunch if we decide to go down this process. If we don't, then you're looking at either a FLOST or L-host election come mid-November of next year, which, again, that is a 1% sales tax on the ballot alone, because most cities, some cities don't have elections depending on the election year and depending on who qualifies. So it just matters, and so that is the first concern. The second concern is really this would probably not go to the ballot until May of 2028, which means it would not be implemented until January 29. So regardless, there will be no homestead relief on the ballot if we miss this window. The second thing we would do, so we present it to the people to vote if they want to go down this path, and we present FLOST to the people based on the IGAs that the counties and the cities agree to. We present this to a vote in November to the people. If the people voted in, then we would build, me and Marvin and Lane would build homestead exemptions around these proposals to make sure that we are presenting targeted relief to our homesteaders. Finally, those referendums would go to voter approval in November of 2027. You would still have an election come 2027, but that being said, it's a homestead exemption versus going to the ballot for a 1 cent sales tax. So the current taxable tax base is about $4.2 billion. That's your entire property tax value in Catoosa County as of this year. Your homestead assessed value, based off the numbers Ashley has provided me, is 1.75. That's for the county and for the school board. The remaining non-homestead digest is roughly $2.434 billion. That being said, how we put those numbers, we use it just like the Eldos formula. We put it towards the homesteads first, and then we lowered everything else equally. And what that comes out to for the cities of Fort Oglethorpe, for the cities of Ringgold, for the county, is about 0.7 mill rate across the board. That's after your homestead. So basically, what I'm saying is there'd be a 1% sales tax on the ballot. It would go, and it would immediately go towards lowering the mill rate across the board. But your digest would not have homestead digest in it at all. It would be taken off the table. So you would increase your millage rate temporarily, or it would not affect your actual cash flow. It would just affect your piece of paper that you present to digest, which is why I presented everybody's digest on y'all's table, and you can see that. So it would increase your millage rate for commercial non-homestead properties, but then it would immediately lower it due to the FLOST offset from 6.7 for the county to 0.7, from the City of Ringgold 3.65 to 0.7, from the City of Fort Oglethorpe 5.25 to 0.7. It lowers everything equally. The digest on your table does show a little bit of a different number. That's because each entity has separate exemption codes, which would be completely offset by this, and other things as well. And so each one is based on your personal tax digest that luckily Ashley has provided with those numbers. That is why we're talking about an IGA that's based off the LDOS numbers, which is 85.25 for the county, 5.25 for the City of Ringgold, and 9.5 for the City of Fort Oglethorpe. What this plan does is it lowers everybody's property taxes equally for all entities, while at the same time making sure no one's getting windfall of those tax rates. And what I spoke on a little bit earlier too, is with one single code, because the City of Fort Oglethorpe would have a code, the City of Ringgold would have a code, the City of Catoosa would have, and the County of Catoosa would have a code, but they would all match based on legislation rewrite that would clean up the entire tax exemption code. So, because you would no longer need a senior tax exemption because you'd have full homestead exemption. So all these exemptions, all the worries that other entities have for exemptions and other things would be made mute because you're moving away from that taxable digest. So let's talk about the school system portion for a second. So on the school system portion, what we did is model it towards a 19 and 20 mill rate. So what that means is, and I'm going to bring up an Excel sheet later when we talk when I talk about a little better with those questions. But for each entity in city, the basic mill rate right now in Catoosa County, based on the proposed digest that each entity has provided, is about 20.7 mill rate per commercial space or point anything else. For inside the cities, it's about 24 mill rates for each of those separate entities. So what this would do is the school board would go to either 19, 20 mills, and you'd have a remaining about 0.5 or 0.6 for the county and other entities. And so it would keep to that same mill rate on the commercial or other properties completely the same. And what that does is your current budget that you approved is $45.393 million. The school revenue at 19 mills, and this is again in 2028, so you're going to have to attach some inflationary numbers to that, of course, is 49.7 for 19 mills and 52.314 at 20 mills. Of course, if you go to that 20 mills, you're at that cap, and so if something happens, we need to talk about guardrails, which I presented some options. The good thing about these local acts is we can write this any way we need to. These are constitutional amendments. And so what that means is anything we pass, as long as it's not contrary to the U.S. Constitution, and as long as the voter knows what they're voting on, we can craft to create guardrails in place to make sure that everybody's revenue streams are protected, while at the same time protecting our homeowners and making sure they know which exemptions they're getting. So let's use some real-world examples. The first example is an apartment complex in Ringgold. The assessed value is $1.9 million. The current total of property taxes is $43,000. Under the proposed 20 mills rate, because Ringgold has two mill rate systems, which is the city and the county, it lowers it to $40,000 if the school goes to the entire, and that's with the county numbers attached to it. These are all what their final bill will pay. Again, my numbers are based off what the owner of the house would see. Because at the end of the day, people, again, don't care how we're taxing them. They just want to make sure that we're lowering their taxes and that that's the final value, we're not increasing their tax rate. So, the other example is commercial in the City of Fort Oglethorpe. It's $7.5 million. The current value of their taxes is $176,000 that they pay yearly at a 20 mil Catoosa County school system rate. With county and the City of Fort Oglethorpe's taxes included, it'd be $153,000. You can see it would be still a reduction for these commercial spaces. So what we're talking about is a legislative and ballot sequence, November 2026, and go to ballot, which is, well, again, why we're on that time table crunch. Is we have to figure out, we have to have these conversations very quickly for all the entities if we're deciding to put this to a ballot. We will not have this opportunity for another 2 or 3 years, which means it will not be implemented for 3 to 4 years. And so to see any type of tax relief structure, we will not be able to see that unless we start acting now. That would be up to us in January 2027 to pass a local act. Homestead exemption referendums are much easier to pass than L-hosts. We do not foresee a problem. I've talked to leadership on this issue. They do not foresee a problem. There's other things that we could do, especially going into a regular session that would affect the passage in a positive way. So we're not worried about passing a local act at that point. Again, there would still be an election come November 2027 for homestead exemptions, and then the implementation would go into effect. So with FLOST, it would be for the year 2027, it would be a gradual reduction across the board. That's the numbers you see in your 2027 digest for every system. It would be a flat reduction. The school system will not be affected that first year because none of this will go into effect until 2028. Then in 2028, come January, it would be implemented and fully go into effect. There are guardrails that I would recommend. One being a sunset clause. What I mean by that is we tie these exemptions directly to FLOST. If FLOST goes away, the exemption goes away, and we return back to the system we have now. It does not have to be a long FLOST. We could do a 2-year FLOST or a 3-year FLOST, build the bridge, and then go back to LHOS come what we know in January. So there are options here. A residency clause for the school board. Again, going to that 20 mil cap, I recognize the reasoning of being worried if a type of economic downturn happened. You're seeing, if an economic downturn happened, you see about a loss of revenue by about $1 to $3 million, which is why I recommend some type of residency clause. I think it's more than fair. You come in, live 5 years in the county, and then you have a full homestead exemption. So and those are things that we can discuss. It doesn't have to be 5 years. Again, all of this is negotiable and talk about it. You just have to have these conversations on how we want to craft this to do that. And then finally, we could do some type of trigger or emergency year statute to where if your revenues dipped too low of a point to be a concern, we declare an emergency and we void the exemption for that year, depending on military. Like I said, we can work with the lawyers to properly write this in a way that protects the revenue stream for our services, while at the same time providing true full relief. Perfect. That's the end of my slideshow. I have all the numbers, and I can walk through all the numbers with you. I'll put up my Excel sheet in a second, and then I'll open the floor for conversations.
I think first of all, Lisa, do you want to talk to anything?
Well, I'm happy to, that was a lot, and I know this is all very complicated, and trust me, I've been doing nothing but helping counties with LHOS and FLOST both. I mean, and especially if you don't live in the government world, it's a lot, right, to think about. You know, I will say it's an extremely interesting idea. It's the first time that I've really seen this, because we've been just very focused on LHOS. There were a lot of counties that were excited about LHOS, that introduced an LHOS Act, and you know, as you mentioned, none of them passed. So I feel like there are a lot of counties that are frustrated, that were hoping, and I do still think that counties will be thinking about LHOS coming into next session. I mean, you know, I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have about how this will work. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things to consider. You know, I mean, if you're in this room because you care about this community. I don't like paying property. I mean, I own a house in Whitfield County, and I pay property tax. So, you know, I could see how I would be thrilled if I lived in Whitfield. Whitfield was having this conversation. They're not there yet. I do think the clauses at the end that you mentioned would be extremely important, because, you know, there's always the fear of what would happen if you were not able to remove the FLOST. So I was happy to hear that clause was in there. And then the other clauses discussed for the school system, because obviously I worked here for years. You have an amazing school system. And so, you know, funding county operations, funding school operations is just becoming ever more a challenge every day. I mean, I hear about it every day. And so, you know, expenses are going up and up. We're struggling with, you know, wage wars, trying to keep qualified staff. I mean, for most of us in local government, our biggest asset is our people, and it's usually it is the biggest percentage of our budget. So keeping staff, you know, keeping up with the cost of health insurance benefits. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a simple mathematical equation. You have services that you have to provide, and counties and schools, you know, often those are mandated services. We don't have a choice. You know, cities not so much, but counties definitely have a list of mandated services that have to provide. So this is really a question of funding, right? The cost of those services doesn't go away. That money is coming from somewhere. It's a reallocation. So where, as a policy decision for the community, and I think it's fantastic that you're hosting this meeting, because I think it's very important that all of the stakeholders come to the table and talk about this. You know, this is a big discussion that affects everybody in the community. So at the end of the day, who do you want paying the money that's coming in to fund those services? I mean, it's definitely a policy conversation. I will say, Catoosa County obviously is in a wonderful position. As mentioned before, you have tremendous sales tax revenue. You're very fortunate in that regard. So I would say, I haven't heard the number recently, but I imagine a lot of the sales tax revenue coming into Catoosa is paid by people who do not live in Catoosa County. So in that regard, you're capturing that funding and hopefully utilizing it to provide property tax relief. But it's definitely a big discussion. I mean, FLOST and LHOST are new. And so we've been talking to counties across the state about what is the best option for you. This is kind of the third option, right? That that's new, that I'm just processing along with you. But definitely FLOST requires an intergovernmental agreement. That's the way the FLOST law stands right now. So to be able to have a FLOST, you have to have at least 50% of your municipal population signing off on the IGA. I definitely think you need to think about the digest, and as you look at the city and you look at the county, what percentage of the digest is made up of commercial industrial and those various taxing authorities. The schools, the schools are capped at 20 mills. That's different. That's a challenge for the school system. So once they bump up against that, unfortunately, property tax revenue is the only source of revenue that local governments can control. It's a stable source of revenue. It's been that way for years. So as you shift that burden over to sales tax, you just need to think carefully about the consequences of that. I mean, I think this is a very interesting, conversation, and I do think it's been very well thought out. I think the clauses at the end, I was I will be honest, this is new to me too. I was very happy to see that because I would be concerned because let's be honest, if you put a homestead, 100% homestead exemption out there, raise your hand if you think that's gonna pass. You think that's gonna pass? Yes. Is it ever gonna go away?
Correct, which is the importance of the trigger.
Exactly, it's never gonna go away. So those are just things that, you definitely have to think through, I think.
And a lot of people's concerns around the table that we've been able to talk to is sales tax revenue growth versus property tax revenue growth. And so I've been able to look at that thanks to the school system putting a very transparent budget online that we've been able to pull for the last 20 years of the tax digest. Over the last 20 years, the sales tax has stayed consistent with the digest, almost number for number. It, of course, waxes and wanes a little bit away from that baseline, but it's stayed very consistent every year. And so on that, I was able to pull away, that way y'all know where we're pulling from, is your digest roughly goes up 3.9% a year. And this is the school systems. And your revenue requests stay about 3.85. So you always stay inside that digest, even with downturns. So if you have a very consistent mill rate, you will stay with inflation inside that digest consistently. So it's not that it will go away. And as you can see with the digest, that's staying at 20 mil solid rate every year. Y'all can choose to take a rollback, but I would recommend staying at a solid rate, either 19 or 20. And again, you can base that on ways you can create guardrails for this type of exemption. But that being said, it is very consistent revenue, while at the same time it's staying inside your digestion.
Yeah, I have a question. I tried to do some research on this to try to find out if it had been done anywhere. I'm talking about the 100% homestead. I can't find it. In fact, my question was, has it been done anywhere in the United States? The answer was no.
Correct. This is the first time anybody's looked at the full homestead exemption. And because of where the county sits with our sales tax revenue, while at the same time having a very low percentage of our digest as homesteads, we're in a very rare opportunity. Even Chairman Blackman couldn't believe of the opportunity that we have because of those crossroads. Not every county can do this. And we talked about this earlier. I highly recommend most counties don't do this because about 20% of the counties actually sit at this crossroads. And so because of where Catoosa County is at, we have that opportunity. Walker County does not have this opportunity. Catoosa does not have this opportunity. Whitfield, they don't have digest. Yeah, it goes up. Their digest waffles too much. But Catoosa County, because we stayed consistent, and because our rollback rates, and because of where all our millage rates are, we have this opportunity to do it. If your mill rate was literally 1 point higher, you could not do this plan. And that's on your current proposed 15.75 plan. And that's just because of how the digest sits and where y'all are at with steady mills.
Do you think adding that 1%, may decrease that number instead of increasing?
So,
The reason it stayed consistent this long is because of the sales tax is lower than it is in Tennessee.
So we've looked at, I've looked at percentages across the state and their rate of returns based on their loss, their FLOST, and other things like Cherokee County and other counties that have either a higher rate or a lower rate than us, and seeing what type of difference you see in your sales tax revenue base, and it's very negligible.
Those counties aren't a border county in Tennessee.
Correct, but they have about a percentage difference. I mean, you're still talking about 1 point for this county versus 1 point for that county. With us going from 7 to 8, we're still 1.25 away from Tennessee, which gives us an equivalent to these counties. So that's why I was looking at those.
So, in all your research, did you ask any business?
I've talked to businesses, I've talked to rentals, I've talked to homesteaders. I've met very good reception from most people that have seen these numbers.
When I'm talking about a Walmart or a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Costco.
I haven't talked to the CEOs now,
I mean,
or
that's the
even
big one.
someone of the corporate rate now.
And you know it's gonna hurt Costco because it numbers millions.
Again, you don't really see that in the loss of revenue, and especially if you look at these assumptions based on the individuals of our county. We're here to represent our members of our counties and our districts and our cities. And you can see this from a tax difference, is that they are taxed across the board, depending on income, at very much lower rates. And so not only will we see yes, they might go up 300, I think the average sales tax increase is about $350. And so yes, it will go up $350. But you're going to lower everybody's expenses by about $1,800. So you're gonna see that influx also of money coming in to increase that sales tax revenue. So it's self-perpetuating as well.
Well, if I lived in Walker County or Whitfield County or Hamilton County, I'd probably, we did this at 100%, I'd want to move to Catoosa County, wouldn't you?
So will everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but if I was a business and I saw that this burden had shifted almost exclusively to agriculture, commercial, and industrial property, darn if I'm located in Catoosa County, and then you have a situation where we have this larger population and not the infrastructure to supply.
Well, and that's the importance of the
I'm not
5-year.
advocating either way, but if we go with that methodology, if businesses see rooftops, they're gonna wanna be there, because that's their clientele. And I'm not arguing for or against, but I know how we get retail and how we get business to locate here is people. So, with a penny, make them go there, and I don't want their thousand look at it.
And
So I think you can argue either way, and I'm not arguing for it, I think we're gonna look at both sides.
And businesses operate, I mean, very much like individuals. They care about the bottom line, right? Their bottom line, even though yes, it's shifted on them, it stays the same, which is, it goes from 20.13, which is you can see in this slide up here. And this is county property, this is not cities. Cities operate differently. So Walmart would actually see that higher number of a 12% reduction across the board. And that's the numbers that y'all see on that page. But the average county property would be exactly the same. So you're getting taxed because of how loss revenue works. You're not getting taxed on your home. You have a 1 cent sales tax, and you're getting taxed on any other property you own in this county. That's how that would work. You would have no taxes on your home.
But this example that shows Walmart going down by 13.
Right.
That's after all of this?
That's after all of this. So you
So
can,
they're
their mill rate, effective mill rate goes from 23.51, which is projected this year, to 20.60. Which is a drop of 12%. So Walmart still gets, like you were concerned, still gets a very strong reduction of the 12% tax decrease.
The majority of that's the 20% school board tax.
Correct. Yeah, they would go to the 20 minutes. That's at 20 minutes.
So what is the idea on the emergency relief to the school system? Because it's state law that we can't go past 20 minutes.
Correct.
And that's the difference, you know, because we have an FLOST ourselves, and it's one said we collected, I don't know, maybe everybody in here is jealous of that, sorry.
No,
But I will say this, we're limited, and we're limited on what we can tax, and the county's not. So what's the idea?
So there's two different stands there. Again, that's where the triggers and where something we can craft towards the board saying, this is an emergency year. We're saying, worst case scenario that I was able to find, sales tax revenue dropped 15 to 20%. That's the worst case I was ever able to find. And that was state funding, that was not even local sales tax. Local sales tax dropped about 10 to 15 at most. And so let's say it's the worst year ever. And because of that 15% drop, everybody's taxes on the commercial and other states go up for your city side about 15%. Well, it's only about a 6 to 7% increase on their side. Your digest would decrease by about 5%. It's the lowest percentage I've ever found. And that 5% could be picked up with either a 5-year residency because you're bringing in additional revenue, so you could lower your mill rate to not being at that 20 mill rate. You could be at 19 mill rate consistently, and then in an emergency situation go up to that 20 mill rate and come back down later. But there's ways to do it to where you can frame it to where you have strong revenue streams coming in that are over your current projections.
So Mitchell, first of all, thank you so much for putting this together. I know it's a lot of work, and I know you've done a lot of legwork to make this happen. So, you know, we get unfunded mandates. So let's say in 29, you know, health insurance goes up again. It's doubled, as we know, in 4 years. Let's say health insurance goes up. It costs $1 million that year. How do you see this working? Because we're at 20. We can't do there's no other way to generate funds. So we've got to come up with $1 million somehow. That is when, tell me how this safety kicks in. So this would be, let's say there's some parameter that triggers an emergency year. What does that look like?
Okay, great. So let's talk, and again, we can talk more about this once we craft the exact legislation. But let's just use a perfect example, which is your current proposal, and then a rollback rate after that. Rollback rates are about a 1% increase, and I'm using that as your baseline of what y'all have done in the past behavior mentality, which is, so from 2025 to 2031, your revenue is increasing from 45 million, it goes up to 53 million this year, and it will be projected to be about 53 or 54 million dollars based on this year's property tax millage rate. And that's if you take a rollback every year. So let's just use that as your baseline. If you didn't take your rollback every year, you would still see an increase of about 3.88%. So if you wanted to, I'm saying all this to say, is this grows at the same rate as what your current system is. It will grow every year. If you stay at that 20 mil rate, at the 3.9% increase every year based on our digests and our averages of our digests. The only time that you would see any type of reduction or shift would be, say, a type of recession, which is why I recommend that 19 mil rate, and we find parameters to make sure that a mill is only $2.5 million. So we can craft something in the sense of either residency clauses or something of that nature to where we're finding that additional revenue to where you're at that 19 mil rate and you have an additional $2 million. But every year, this will grow $2.5 million. Well, even with the state allotments to your, as we've been able to see over the last 3 years, almost every single state mandate or state thing, other than ones that were local bills, have been equivalent to what your increase on your QDE formula has been, or very close to it. It was a little bit of like a $50,000 difference this year. That being said, I'm saying all this to say, the state's revenue stays pretty consistent at about 70%, is it 60-40? 60% for Catoosa and 40% for the county, and that consistency will still stay in place. But that's why I would recommend some type of triggers or some type of carve out to make sure that you have that extra mill to 2 mills to be able to move.
So each year the public hearings would take place. We would have to still go through that process.
Correct.
Is that okay?
But yeah, I mean, again, it would no longer be on your homeowners. So your homeowners would not come And your residents will not come. It wouldn't affect your business, but that's up to your business to show up and to address those concerns with you.
But that would require a change in state law, because to get above the 20 mils, we would have to change state, that's a general law.
And that's what I'm saying, I would stay at that 18 and 19, and then in emergencies, bump up to that 20, and then fluctuate. And that's where you build that tax code to be able to fluctuate. And again, this is not without any, so the numbers I presented in these digests are with no guardrails. So if you created some type of guardrail mechanism, it would create that $5 to $6 million revenue, which is 2 mils of growth every year that could wax and wane depending on your needs.
When can you show us the guardrails and the changes you propose?
So the guardrails, that's what I'm saying, so the
Well, I have to
guardrails,
know that before we vote on it.
well, the guardrails are just for the school system and for the homestead exemption. So the homestead exemptions will not go to the floor until January. That being said, for the counties and for the cities, those guardrails, other than a guardrail to make sure it's tied to FLOST, would not matter for you guys, because most of y'all's complete digest is covered by the sales tax. Y'all have that sales tax revenue. The school system does not, so you have to make sure that they have a better structured guardrails, because of their base is property taxes.
Mitchell, you talked to Chairman Blackman about, the legislature recently passed laws that will now take into account local exemptions for things like local fair share and equalization. So if something like this came to fruition, does that
This falls under.
drastically increase our state funding? Like how does that work?
So I discussed it with legislative council, I've discussed it with Shaw. And so Senate Bill 33, just so everybody knows, we tied in, we wanted to make sure that QE and equalization was no longer tied to all the exemptions that we could do to make sure that our tax base was much more beneficial to our QE formulas and allotments. And so we were able to change that in a sense to where these count as constitutional amendments, so they will fall under these protections.
Okay, so it would likely benefit us.
Correct, in your equalization.
Once that law is functioning and.
The law is was functioning June 1st, it's just to see how the regulatory.
Yes.
Yes, the GDOE implemented.
Okay.
That's the only concern I have with that, is the GDOE has to implement all this stuff. And
Right.
they can dictate rules vastly different than our intention of the bill.
Sure.
Is basing all of this off of 3 years like a standard? Is there a way to look further than 3 years? Because I feel like
So the
they're
assumption.
coming out of COVID, and is there a way to go back further to even take into account a shutdown, a recession? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. So, where I pulled my assumptions from is 20 years worth of digest from the school system. I did a pre-COVID number, and I did a all years on file. And that's what you're seeing here, is the digest increased pre-COVID about 2.61. As we know, those digests were artificially kept low for years, other reasons, and state reasons and local reasons that we don't need to get into, but was kept artificially low for many years. The revenue increases for all entities still stayed underneath that digest amount for pre-COVID numbers. For all years on file, it was very high. It was a 5% increase with a 4.7% revenue increase every year. So I decided to do a midpoint baseline, and I'll explain why I did a midpoint baseline. And what I mean by midpoint is I took the pre-COVID and I used it as one average, and I took the remaining all years on file and I used that as the second average. And the midpoint that came up to, in my opinion, is much more fair, because we're still in a federal inflationary cycle. They're still pumping out money, they're still spending trillions of our dollars, and our inflations are naturally still going up at about 2 to 3%. Bond rates are still up 2 to 3%. So it's naturally to still see these higher baseline numbers come in, because that's how it affects yours. With the dollar losing, again, your home's not going up that quickly in value. It's the dollar losing value because they're pumping so much money out. And so that's why we use that baseline digest, which is a midpoint between those couple of years that you talked about and then the pre-COVID full
So it
20-year
basically
digest.
just removes the recession
No,
of the COVID years. It basically removes those years. You're looking at pre and post.
No, I'm looking at pre and then all. So
Gotcha. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Okay, got it.
Does your model take into consideration the first year that you would have the full homestead exemption, that when you pass FLOST, you're only gonna have access to just a few months of collections?
Correct. And it also,
So in that
that's a fair
first
point.
year, the schools, like, how would they be able
So-
to recapture that revenue if they only have, or, this, you see what I'm saying? You're gonna have to
You're right.
raise the millage rate to capture all of the lost homestead, but you only have like 4 months of lost revenue that first year.
Correct, so it would still be an, and I did not, you're right about that. So I'll have to rerun that, but that being said, even if it goes up, let's use the county for example, at 4.35, it goes to 6.7, those 4 years, those 4 months would still lower it back to that baseline of 4.5. And that's for the county numbers, and that's just for the 4
But
months.
what about the schools though? Cause they'd be losing all of that revenue.
Well, the school
You see,
system.
So they can only, like the floss, you'd only have a few months of floss to reduce the millage rate for commercial industrial, right?
Right.
So is that gonna bump them up against?
No, they will not implement this millage rate change until, 28. Because, that they would not be affected by the 27 floss changes, because their full homesteads would go into effect.
So it's just gonna be the county and the cities that are gonna have to worry about just having a few months of floss.
Correct.
And so I don't know, yeah, that would, because that politically, that would be
Right.
difficult for them to raise the millage rate. And that
And
is-
let's
yeah.
talk about that. Because I've had 17 years of that experience. And my experience is not what you've seen, is over the years, people do understand the millage and do, get upset when you raise the millage. And I guess I still have PTSD from 2008. Let's go back to 2008, to the recession, when the state cut our budget $10 million in 1 year. One, not over 5, 1 year, $10 million. And the only thing that saved us was the property tax revenue being steady. So I'm just gonna say that it's always a challenge to communicate why you're doing something. And in my experience, I have been beat up for businesses when raising the millage rate. It's not just the homeowners, it's businesses too. And so raising the millage rate to 19, and let's just say that that was something that you wanted to do, I personally don't see doing that. Because when Whitfield County raised their millage rate by 4 mills many, many years ago, they weren't reelected. And you get a recall when you do something like that, because people don't, if, I've had 1 week to try to wrap my head around this. We're very late to the party here. So the information that we received from you, I just got last week. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this whole idea. And so there are a lot of things, I feel very rushed right now. I feel extremely rushed into making a decision that can weaken our economy here in Catoosa, because I know changing from a very steady revenue stream to a consumer-driven revenue stream is very, it can be catastrophic, because you can't, I mean, we have built schools not to close them if we go into a recession, and we have no then ability to raise revenue to keep schools open and to pay 900 contracted employees every year. So it's very overwhelming, it's very complicated, and I have a problem going into a system where I need an emergency out. That's scary to me, is, okay, raise the millage rate to 19, but you know, for an emergency, you can raise it to 20, but then when things don't go back to normal, we have no ability to maintain the school system that this community expects. So, you know, it sounds, oh, just raise the millage rate to 19. Well, that is very scary.
Absolutely, and then let me address those couple of layers of those concerns. So first is, it's not raising it, this would change the system where we're all operating together. And luckily, the school board does not have to agree to this mechanism in this month. It's just the IGA would have to agree if they want to go down that path. This provides the school system an opportunity to use this once they pass FLOST, it gives you guys that one opportunity to say, how are we gonna evaluate our tax structure? Because at the end of the day, the business tax does not change, even if y'all went to that 19-20 mil. If you went to that 20 mil, their taxes don't change. Your taxes do, it goes to 20 mils, theirs goes down. And so because of that, at the end of the day, the person paying the bill, on the commercial real estate, does not change. In fact, most of this, it goes down 10, 12%. So it's still a tax decrease for all commercial spaces out there. It's not a tax increase in any way, shape, or form. It's holding steady for everything else and giving you the opportunity.
And that's the challenge, is to being able to communicate
Correct.
that, because
I agree.
that's the challenge
Correct.
that I'm talking about, is communicating to people that we're not raising your taxes, but we're raising the millage rate to 19.
Correct, you're absolutely right. This is not, because the digest goes, gets touched by 40%. So yes, you are increasing your mill rate, but the taxes will not change at all. And so that's that. And then the other thing is this, is they can work towards a full homestead and a FLOST, and they have those mechanisms to do that before January. We can have this ongoing conversation until January, but FLOST gives you that opportunity to be able to say, how do we want to structure our tax code? And that's kind of my point here. We get a baseline of saying, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, how are we going to use it?
Well, what happens, which I heard someone say, that everybody's gonna say, we're gonna move to Catoosa County because we got 100% homestead exemption. Which means we're gonna have to build more schools. So how are we gonna do that?
So East FLOST, of course, is still a capital project, and then
But
second.
it sunsets, and there's no guarantee
Agreed.
that it's not gonna be voted back in.
Yeah, well, but of course, you have East FLOST for most capital projects. The second thing is this, is that's the importance of the residency clause, is it still allows some type of mechanism to be able to push that. If you have to come here for 5 years, that's a vastly different thing than just moving and saying, I have a property tax. I agree that, and that's why you do need some investment in your community. Some type of residency clause that says you've lived here X amount of years to protect.
So,
So some people would continue to pay their property taxes until they lived here 5 years.
At 20
get-
mil?
And there would still be a tax decrease based, and I have those homesteads too, even after those 5 years. It would still be a millage rate decrease versus what they're paying now.
So I sit here and I listen, and again, thank you. This seems like you put a lot of work into this, but I hear all positive, okay? If I hear positive, where are the negatives?
Absolutely.
I need both sides of this. So if the world catches on fire, I know this place is gonna burn down. That's the negative with fire. What's the negative if we do this?
Well, you're basing your revenue off of sales tax then, right? So you would go from property taxes to sales tax consumption base. So if your sales tax moves a lot faster than the economy than property taxes. Property tax is not more stable, sales tax just moves faster. So we'll use two world fire situations, it's COVID and then 2008. So during COVID,
But I don't wanna, I'm sorry. I don't wanna use COVID because COVID has become an excuse. So please, let's not do COVID.
I'll put it inflationary pressure.
Okay.
So inflationary pressure.
This includes COVID.
So we'll say inflationary pressure, okay? Because most likely what is coming is some type of federal government inflationary pressure for all our entities. They have to pay their bonds and their debt, right? And so that dollar value loses value. And so your costs are gonna go up. And because your costs go up, you're gonna go to the store and you're gonna pay more, right? But that's why sales tax gets collected a lot faster. With property taxes, it's about a 2-year delay, and that's what you've seen with federal and sales tax revenues, is inflationary pressures occur 2 years later. And so y'all have to quickly adjust 2 years after the fact, and that's why you had those concerns with property tax digest. So for the school system, they need to be prepared for that inflationary pressure to be able to wax and wane depending on that moment. But with a consumption base, your consumption will grow exponentially. And equal to what your inflationary pressures would be. So that's cause A. Cause B would be some type of recessionary event. A recessionary event which would cut your sales tax because everybody's income would go down about, again on average, about 20%. For sales tax revenue, the highest I've seen locally is 15% decrease. So you're gonna be caught with a 15% decrease. You will still have a digest. So your digest would go from, let's show the map. We'll go to the City of Ringgold, and we'll say in year 2029, we had a drop, of 20%. So a drop of 16.9% in sales tax revenue. That means your millage rate for your city would go from 0.4 to 0.9 for commercial spaces. That would be the worst case scenario of how that would affect your revenue. And then you'd have to grow and cut and figure out how to meet that revenue long term.
Basically making us fund everything based on human behavior at that point in time, which is why it is so incredibly scary. It sounds amazing. It would be amazing to be able to offer this to the people who live in our city. The concern is it is 100% based on human behavior at that moment in time. What are people going to spend? What are they willing to spend? What's the economy doing? What's the not just the local economy, the national economy, global economy? It's all based on the behavior of spending money.
And that's the important.
That's what's scary.
Correct.
And unpredictable. No matter what numbers we throw up here, it cannot bring down the uncertainty of human behavior.
Correct. And that's the importance of
That
having
moment
those
in time.
windows of 2, 3, 4 years, is knowing how long you wanna try it, see it in fact and principle, and still apply. And so that's why I'm saying, you don't have to do the full 5 years, no one's saying you have to, but you could create some type of bridge to get to that.
Mitchell, the one thing I do know, I know without a doubt, if this is on a referendum, it's gonna get overwhelmingly passed. I also know without a doubt that the anger of taxes will shift from millage rates to sales tax. And where will that get looked at? On the school side, it's gonna get looked at with FLOST. And on the county side, it's gonna be looked at on SPLOST. And those people that are frustrated and feel like they're overtaxed, if all this, and all this is great, and you and I, we've talked about this, how long has it been? 3 years
Yeah.
we've been talking about this and working towards it, and I'm for it. But my fear is, we keep looking at natural economic downturns. There's another downturn we haven't mentioned, and that's a voter downturn. That a voter's gonna go say, you know what, I'm voting for this penny reduction because I'm getting something real for that. But you know what, the next time I get a chance to vote, I'm gonna vote against SPLOST or SPLOST or LOST or whatever, because now I can effectively, we've had a tax shift, but now I'm in charge of my tax decrease.
And I feel it in my pocketbook.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important point that Chuck, you bring up, because, you know, we have seen where we are trying to give seniors a little bit of help. If the tax line is here, and we say, if you're a senior citizen, you take 5 steps forward, because we know you need some help. If you're a disabled veteran, take 2. If you make less than X amount, you get to take 2. And then we say, okay, now everybody's gonna get to take 5. We have effectively taken away what we originally said we were going to do to help those folks who were less fortunate. What does that do with seniors when they got a little bit of a break now, and they need it, they deserve it, we all want it, despite what people think. I think the school board hates property taxes as much as anybody, especially today. We have to talk about it. But what does that do for them? That's a thing I think is very concerning, that they're gonna pay for this in a major way at the cash register. And if we're talking about 20 mills for 5 years, that means every new subdivision's built, every new home that's sold, every time somebody wants to turn around and sell their house. I think those are a lot of considerations that also need to be thought about, because what you said is true. The voters are gonna, they better have answers, and it's already complicated enough.
You know, all this got started, is anybody in here old enough to remember Proposition 13? Besides Sarah, I'm sure you are. I just made another enemy. Over here, one. But you know, it sounded great, didn't it? And it passed by a long shot out in California. And what did it do? There were 5 big oil companies out there, now there's 1. They all ran out. They didn't want that tax burden that shifted to them. And they got freeways that are going to nowhere. They got railways that are going to nowhere. And of course, I know they've got different politics too. It's ridiculous. But the point is, they're broke. They're 10 times broke. They're billions of dollars broke. And you know, I just don't see how we can, and I appreciate the work that you've done, but crunching these numbers to make sure that they meet the exigencies of the situation, I don't see how it's there. I just don't.
And that's the importance of making sure that you're basing it off of human behavior, but also long-term projections and making sure that you have guardrails in place to where you can meet those needs. Again, this doesn't have to be a permanent structure. It can either be a bridge, and then on top of Chuck's main concerns, which is, yes, people are then gonna start looking at sales tax. So we have to, every single entity here has a need, has a line item, exact budget need. And y'all passed it this year, or are currently passing it. The question we're trying to have today is how do we collect that? Who should we collect it from? And how should the voter decide where that comes from? And long term, does the math work to where everybody gets their revenue needs, while at the same time making sure that you have long-term economic preparation? I can't promise you tomorrow. I can give you the best analysis for it, and I can give you the best mechanism to collect those taxes for you. And what I mean by the best collection is the least amount for our citizens, for our taxpayers. And so that's what this is kind of targeted for. And so a perfect example of this is the superintendent asked about senior tax and vice versa. Everybody in this system, and I've ran it from the seniors, I've ran it from local system, I've ran it from the high. Because we're now reliant on sales tax, from that 40% getting pulled in from the state, from 40% getting pulled in from Hamilton County, from Whitfield, from Walker, we have an opportunity. But it could be clear, and that's why you put years and check marks and making sure that this exemption is tied to what we're talking about and not just perpetually floating out there. And that's where you want to make sure that you're giving relief to everybody, because no one here is for tax increase. I think we all can all agree on that. It's just how do we tax our people to be the most efficient to make sure that our average citizen is paying the least. And we have to be honest with that on how we do that. And so that's kind of what this proposal allows, is to make sure that we're taxing our individuals efficiently, because no one's saying we can't tax. Tax is unfortunately the burden of a civilization. But we have to figure out how we do it in an efficient, clean manner, and that way we're not putting an exemption here, an exemption there, exemption here. How do we want our tax structure to be laid out? And FLOST gives us that opportunity this next couple of years to decide that very cleanly. And if we decide to do FLOST or a 1 cent sales tax during the next couple of months, we have to figure this out. Unfortunately now, again, the school system can have these ongoing discussions, but the local entities need to decide if they want to move forward or in some way, shape, or form decide another mechanism long term.
Well, if it's a bridge and we do this and we do 100% exemption and then we decide we see it doesn't work, so then we have to go back to the property taxes. And I walk into this meeting, 5 years from now, I won't see one soul, not one of them, because you're all gonna be voted out. I won't recognize the soul.
So,
I can guarantee you that.
Another question, but it's also our job to make sure we are representing the people that voted.
Sure it is, but another thing, this is, to your point, this has been dominoes. Can we not wait a damn year or so, get some more information or something? Because I'm sort of confused.
And so that's.
Well, don't be confused, because don't do anything y'all want to do, and we can do nothing about it. This is to try to help the people, and if you don't like it, then you just don't need to do it.
Well,
It's not a like not liking it, it's more of an understanding.
Wait a minute, I mean, it's
It's not a not liking,
dictating
it's
y'all
a lack of
to do it.
understanding. That's it,
And-
that's it, it's not,
and-
not like.
And if I could make 2 points. Number one, I wanna know, I would love to see a way that that there was a trigger, if we had a downturn in sales tax, that the millage rate could increase if we needed to offset that downturn in sales tax.
Well, your millage rate is
Some
still,
kind of,
you would still have full control of your millage rate. You could still grow your millage rate.
I know,
outside.
but it doesn't grow, it doesn't trigger anything, and it might, downturn might be here, and millage rate might be here, and we'd all be voted out of office. So if there was some kind of trigger built in, and I don't know if this is possible, trigger built in, so that if this target is hit going down, that this increases so that it makes the difference if we need to make the difference. Okay, 1 point, that's 1 point. The second point I'd like to make is something that has nothing to do with numbers, it has to do with messaging. We're all sitting here talking about people don't want to pay taxes. Well, you need to talk about, do you want your children educated? Do you want potholes fixed? Do you need, do you want your services? Do you want your garbage picked up? Nobody seems to mention what we do with those taxes. And there are a lot of people who don't even think government is the people. And I think when the message, and I'll get off my soapbox, but I think when the message starts with, you don't wanna pay taxes, the message should start with, do you wanna educate your children? Do you wanna have good roads? Do you wanna have services? Do you want your garbage picked up? Well, that money comes from all of us. It's not government and us, it is us. And sometimes I think I know what we're talking about, but sometimes I think we start the message wrong. That's what I constantly tell anybody that questions me. I say, okay, what do you want to live without? Because this is not my money, this is our money. And this is how it's spent, and I will show you our budget. So, let's get the message straight.
This way. Communication, as many of you in this room know, is not my strong suit. This is my strong suit. And I say that to say, I've worked towards this to make sure that every single entity has their revenues and their capability of providing the same service that they're providing today. That they're providing the same education, and the same budget that they have presented to each of their boards today in an inflationary context to make sure that they can perpetually do that. So yes, no one's talking about cutting service at all. This is not a budgetary issue. This is a taxation issue. And a taxation issue is how we collect that revenue to use it on that, on the service.
But the message needs to stay both. The message to the people who only look at the bottom line, they don't look at all the little numbers above it.
They can't understand it.
No,
I'm serious.
Yeah, they just look at, this is what I have to pay. But when you start talking about what you get for what you pay for, then you can talk about what you have to pay, and people get it a little more.
The lack of understanding is our fault. The lack of understanding to public, that is our fault. We haven't figured out a solid way to get messaging out there, and this would be hugely important messaging. And you've got great access to video people and videographers and commercials and all that stuff. We've seen it. The messaging of this would have to be stellar, and the understanding of the people would be dependent on that messaging.
Oh, absolutely. Would require all entities, and that's what the importance of this meeting is, to make sure we're all having these conversations, understanding what we're trying to do, moving in one direction. Because at the end of the day, like I said, we don't operate in vacuums. We don't operate in vacuum, I don't operate in vacuum, the cities don't operate in vacuum, and the county doesn't. They just care, is my tax bill going up at the end of the year? And what we're trying to do, and you're absolutely right, is message that to say, we're trying to move it away from your home, keep everything else the same, but move it away from your home and make sure that you are taxed less. and that we're using that money efficiently, but also taxing you efficiently.
One comment I wanna add to what Sarah said, and I appreciate you saying that, because that's true. This past campaign is an example. Every single candidate running for any office, from the state to the locals, anywhere, started off by, we're gonna eliminate or reduce property tax. Every single campaign, that was their tagline. And nobody came back and said how we're gonna do it, what services we're gonna cut. That was where the campaign was to tag people, to get them some kind of, feel good. Oh, I'm gonna pay property taxes. But that, to Sarah's point, that's what the whole campaign, this whole cycle has been about. And I'm not against eliminate property tax, I'm not.
And I know you're exactly right, and I think y'all sitting around this table can see we're providing a plan and providing a baseline to be able to do that in some way. And what I mean by that, this isn't a state policy, this is all of us in Catoosa County coming to one table that other counties and state governments are not doing. There are candidates on Republican ballot, there are candidates on Democrat ballot promising things that they have no plan. I work with them, I know they have no plan. Our job is to present plans that are absolutely, that are messaged and capable of messaging, while at the same time that our citizens are taxed less and in a more efficient way, to where we're making sure that we're providing our constituents, our taxpayers, that relief. Not Walmart to the fullest extent, they still get some, but not Walmart, not other entities that are outside our county.
Commissioner Harris and,
Yeah.
and Jeff Long, next, please.
I wanted to kind of shift gears, because we're getting over into ideology and all that. I want to get back to implementation. So, let's leave the school board out of it for a minute. I say the cities and the counties, because the board knows, I think the entire board, but especially I know myself, I hate property tax, and I've often said, I've never seen Walmart sold on the courthouse steps. I see people's homes being sold on courthouse steps when they can't afford taxes. What I like this, I like it. Now, my fear is, like I said before, I know people will rush the polls to vote in this penny that saves themselves property tax. I know for a fact that next time they can rush to the polls and vote against FLOST or FLOST or whatever, they're gonna do that. But you're talking about, say, a 2-year bridge. So what would that look like if we took this thing and said, let's go for the FLOST, which you're telling me that we can do it, because FLOST, I was never really happy with FLOST. You and I, we talked about it. But when LHO's come out, I said, man, that's the state has fixed the problem. And then the state caused the problem. But apparently you've come up with a workaround. So tell me if, well, again, leave school board out of it, with cities and counties, tell me what a 2-year FLOST, kind of a trial run to move into LHO's?
You could do that path, or you could continue with the FLOST path.
Okay.
And I know many of the commissioners want to do a general ballot. So it would allow you to move to this general ballot, present FLOST, and present some type of way to get your homestead exemption, which is what the full homestead exemption does for each of the entities in the county. So let's take the school board out for a second and just say, what this allows is just LHOs. This is just LHOs by different names. It's just a backdoor LHOs. And it allows it to be directed like you want. That being said, 2027 would be a little different just because of the implementation cycle. So you would have that 1 year that is a little off. But then 2028, you would have your full LHOs. And then depending on the governor's mansion, depending on how we're seeing politics play in Atlanta, you could see maybe LHOs get back on the table next year. We put it to a general ballot in 2028, and you can do a switcheroo. But it's up to how y'all want to define that and decide that and talk through that.
Thanks again for putting all this. I know it's a big number for us to look at, but as Susan said, it's all about what we've heard all year long about everybody's gonna eliminate, and mostly on the state elections. But y'all created this. What's the guarantee that the legislators don't come in and take it away. If you make it, you can take it away just as easy, and then it's gonna fall in our lap.
Let me say something to that, and I've been strongly said that I would work for lowering property taxes. We can't lower property taxes at the state level, and we had a bunch of statewide people, like you talking about, say they were gonna eliminate property taxes. We got a governor running around now that he's gonna cut income tax in half and eliminate property taxes. It's not gonna happen. We gotta give a county a way to offset what you reduce in property taxes. And I agree that it's sickening to sit in here, people say they're gonna lower property taxes.
But-
I wanna work towards lowering property taxes, but we can't, and I understand the dilemma, it is kind of bad what we saw over here. We had statewide candidates saying they were gonna eliminate the property tax, and we cannot eliminate property tax.
And like we all said, if we put it on the ballot, you know, the people's gonna continue to do it. But my point is, if y'all have change or anything in Atlanta, y'all can do away with the LOs, just like you created. And then it's gonna fall in us, say, game's over, we're raising everybody's taxes back up
And it
to
would
where
go,
it was.
yeah, it would go to the end of that referendum, which is why those triggers and those,
Like Ringgold said, none of us will be sitting here.
yeah. And you're exactly right, and because we can't guarantee what Atlanta will do, especially if other parties or other individuals take the reins. If they don't like LOs, they could absolutely strip it from the code.
Just like I learned last week, that through legislation this time, T-Splosh now, if it gets voted down, you gotta wait 8 years before you put it, they could change that on Splosh, E-Splosh, anything else. I mean, there's a lot we've got to weigh out and that we're gambling on. I mean, like, right now, the county, we're looking at, we know we're gonna lose 3% over this time period if this is passed through the laws negotiations that was done. So we're guaranteed to have to find 3% to make it a balance. So, I mean, there's a lot of things out there, and that's my scary thing is what Atlanta's gonna do.
Absolutely. And trust me, as your representative, I think y'all know how much we fight even in Atlanta. And saying that, my concern is, I do not think LDOS will stay like LDOS. And because if another part, or if the minority party decides to come back in, they could absolutely strip this from the code. And so we have to make sure that we have a balance here. And that's why we want to look at FLOST, we already applied FLOST in detail, it's FLOST. It's just a flexible local option settlement. So this is already a proven principle. We do it every day, y'all do it every day. It's just deciding to make sure we have caps to make sure our people don't want another penny or another 1% sales tax, and then we come in and say, well, this didn't work out, so we're gonna put it on your home. That's the importance of LDOS, is to make sure this is going to your home first, and then everything else follows suit. So you have to, it is a balancing scheme, and it's making sure that our entities flow properly and that we can provide that relief long term.
And the people can look at it and say, well, they added this, they took it away from me, so now I'm gonna vote against the E-Splosh or the Splosh, and we'll get it back down to 7 cents where it was. So, and we're not paying property taxes, so, and then that's where we've gotta do something as the elected officials to make that up for the money that you're gonna lose.
Correct, and that's the importance of what y'all done over the last couple of years, is taking that rollback the last 2 years, is with y'all staying inside that 3.8% growth, y'all have these options. It's all about making sure you have fiscal conservative growth, 3.5 to 3.8% of long-term steady consistency. And I mean, that's, at the end of the day, it's just like running a business, running anything else. You have to make sure you're staying inside the parameters, which is you need 3.8% roughly a year to keep going. Either through sales tax or property tax, it doesn't matter. What matters to our citizens matters how we collect it. And that's the discussion that we're having, and you're right, we don't wanna take away collections, but we wanna make sure that we're doing it in the proper way. And if it fails, it fails. We try again in 2 years or 3 or 4, whatever y'all decide, and move to a different system.
When y'all go back in session, November election's over, do you think that majority that didn't vote on it now, because we know they don't want it because of November elections, they don't want a big turnout? So would they be for the LHOs
come January?
We've spoken with, the minority party, and they still will hit it in January. But there are mechanisms that we can do to try to push it to a vote, because it would be a full session, and it wouldn't be a special session on specific ideas or streams of ideas. So there are ways that we could try to force it through, but you're still required 2/3, and frankly, we cannot know how another party coming in to your power could operate.
Lisa had a question.
It's two-part, and I'll try to make it really quick. The first one is for the chief appraiser, Ashley. Ashley, can you speak to issues, the complexity of administering current exemptions? And then, do you have any way of estimating people here who may qualify for a homestead but have not applied for a homestead?
I got you, yeah, both of those are good questions. As far as complexity of homesteads, we, as the congressman mentioned earlier, we do have a crazy number of homestead codes in this county. I blame Fort Oglethorpe mainly for that. But so they're not so difficult to track though. Once we have a set of codes and it's built into our system, built into the tax commissioner's system, so they're sort of set in stone with few changes over the year. One that has been very difficult to ensure the accuracy of is HB 581, just to make sure that the float-based value, which is what that exemption is sort of based around, calculates correctly. So we've spent a lot of time the last 2 years before sending out assessment notices, checking, double checking, triple checking those numbers. So that is very difficult. Of course, that would be essentially null and void if there was 100% homestead exemption. And speaking of what Mitchell said earlier, we basically have a one homestead code, and everybody with a homestead, your net taxable value would be 0. Right. So that couldn't be any more simple than that. Now that's your second part though is a big question, and really a big unknown is how many people living here who qualify for a homestead exemption who just for whatever reason they've never applied. And I know the main reason people never apply is because there's a mentality, because it was true for many years until passing of 581, if you were under 65 years old, the homestead just doesn't save you enough money to bother going to the courthouse to sign up, right? I mean, that's just, the mentality is a few dollars over a year, so why even bother? You waste your gas coming to the courthouse, right? But we do have some ways to verify that, yes, this group of people out here, we know they live and own that home, it's their primary residence. All their records match us through our homestead auditing software, so we can identify a group of people who've never taken advantage of the homestead. I've got a spreadsheet that, sort of tracks that they've sent me. It would be to the tune of at least a couple thousand homeowners that have just never applied. I could get you that exact number based on the software's best estimate. That being said, it's got limitations. It's going out and looking at databases and matching records to say that, yeah, these people live primary residence, so they would qualify, but there could be more than that we don't have sufficient data for. So that's a big unknown, just making you aware of it.
And I've heard that across the state, that's why I asked. So coming back to you, I guess, my question would be, as we've heard a lot about revenue caps, right? So I know a lot of counties, cities, I'm sure, school systems concerned about the revenue cap conversation. So going forward, I think if we start talking about shifting how we're gonna pay for services and we start shifting that towards sales tax, could there be some because the scary part, I think, is messaging, right? And to somebody's point, it might have been Dina's, if you raise the millage rate, they don't, in their mind, everybody goes crazy, right? You have to have these millage rate hearings, and nobody enjoys millage rate hearings. So has there been any talk about, as we start to shift paying for services with sales tax, is there a way to make, so let's say the economy does tank, and you do have to raise the millage rate. What does that look like in an environment where we could possibly have revenue caps? And we know that conversation is coming up. Is there a way to think about how that affects governments with millage rate hearings? Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
So millage rate,
Because-
we're kind of getting away from the topic, which is millage rate increase,
Yeah.
and that is something that the state has played around with before. And frankly, millage rate caps aren't completely terrible, but the way that they have been designed, yes. Because they're capping out like 3% with no inflation, and it just doesn't work. You have to at least be able to do it within parameters, or like what we're talking about, waxing and waning of the economy. And I don't think that the current talks and parameters of those conversations have that thought process. And Tarvin and I,
They don't, yeah.
and Tarvin explained, we believe in that process.
Right,
We
and I
are two of,
appreciate that.
two of 180.
Right.
But that being said, it is a conversation. I don't think that is a high probability of occurring right
Yeah.
now. But I mean, it could, I'm not saying it can't,
Right,
but.
it's a scary conversation.
But that's a whole separate legislative issue.
Right.
That could affect you later down the road, which again, this does not have to be a long-term plan, it can be a bridge, it can be a short-term plan, it can be a testing grant. It's just how do we, again, want to streamline the local efficiencies and then government states its own rat nest.
Yeah, exactly. No, I appreciate the fact that you do seem to understand those challenges.
I had a
Let me
great
say
night.
that. I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
And I may have missed it in all the statistics and the numbers throughout.
Correct, I'm sorry, it's a heavy subject.
Did you, look at the numbers of the average household in Catoosa County, what they spend, and how much is this going to increase, that 1 cent? How is it going to impact, and then we compare that to the number they pay in property tax?
Right.
How much are we saving?
So we have this spreadsheet right in front of us, that I'll turn to, which is personal examples. And this is, I've been able, unfortunately, it's very hard to pull data for selected income groups for Catoosa County. There's only 2 sources, which is Nilsburg and, the census data. So unfortunately, there's just not a lot.
Behind a few years too.
Yeah, and they're behind a few, so it's just very hard to pull this data specifically for our county. For the state of Georgia, it's a little bit better, but this is what I was able to pull for just our county. So seniors, their average assessed value is $130,000. That's the average across the county. There's 2 numbers that I had, which is from Ashley's office, which is $137,000 with S1 senior exemption, but not all senior exemptions take that, and senior exemption is also a little higher than that baseline value. So I decided to go with a slightly lower number, which is the average of $130,000 of assessed value for the average senior home. The applied mill rate for the county, because the county is the only one with a senior exemption on books, except for the City of Ringgold, sorry, I meant to put the City of Ringgold. So their increase in property taxes, just for the county side, would be, their property tax value is $573. The effective sales tax ratio based off the senior, income of $46,000, that's the average for our county, is, because you also have some consumption, it's not, your entire salary is not just going to what you're spending on Walmart and other things, going to housing and other X, Y, and Z. So it's about 76% consumption. And so it's a net sales tax effect of $350, which means that you're getting a tax rate of roughly $219 under this plan.
That's primarily for the seniors.
Which
one of the numbers is for the average household?
Senior low.
Yeah, so you have senior assessed value, $130,000, applied mill rates for the county, which is $507. The average income for the senior is $46,000. Consumption being 76%, so your sales tax is roughly $350, or net taxable difference of $219.
Seniors is what because there are a group that will be paying nothing now.
Right, there's a big
And
group
they'll
that's
pay
paying
their
nothing.
sales tax.
76, you gotta pay it this year.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that's like you my grandmother don't have a my lovely grandmother is 82, and she has,
I'm already done, I've seen it done.
That's what Commissioner Long, Mr. Child, that's what Commissioner Long was talking about when he said the state taking away from it as soon as you get it.
Well, then I moved to Canada.
But ultimately, I think the reason I asked the question, this quote from
a lot of the issues that have been brought up come back to the messaging. To me, the messaging would be, well, if we go through all this process, rather than paying $2,000 a year for your taxes, and you're gonna offset that, you're gonna pay less, you're gonna pay more here, but you're gonna pay less here. What is that amount?
Correct, so I didn't do an average, let's just use middle income, because that's basically an average. That's between the 40 and 60 percentile. So on average, it's about $2,000 per citizen. $4,000 is what they're currently paying, $2,600 through the home rate, and the 4% sales taxes that we, 30% sales tax, sorry, that we currently have allotted. It goes up to 4% sales tax, but you have an offset from your property tax, so it's a drop of about $2,000.
So that's the message.
That's the average amount. The average
Pretty steady, every household,
$2,000.
$2,000. And not say every.
That's with the school system plan too, and all of these discussions having about residency and all the parameters that we put on. Again, this is just, there's so many different variables that we are working through and working on, that I just want to make sure everybody understood baseline number.
Mitchell, did you say on one of your previous slides, year over year for 20 years, the average is what, 4%? Increase in sales tax?
The net digest increase for all years on file was 5.18. I used a baseline of 3.89.
Okay. I mean, for us, we've taken the rollback every year but 1 year that I can remember. So, this would be a no-brainer.
Yeah, and that's why Fort Oglethorpe, if y'all look on your actual mill rate at the end of the day, is in better condition.
So we would have gotten a 5% increase every year without having to go to the citizens.
And that's the importance is, especially if y'all take rollbacks for 2 years, you know, your sales tax revenue will grow at a faster rate than your property tax revenue.
Without having to do 2 hearings.
Correct, and that means that you'll have a steady 3.9% increase every year. That will be sustainable in your budget. So without having to go to mill rates, without going to 3 hearings, without doing X, Y, and Z, it grows steadily. And you can see that on each of your digests, is that you can see it grows at a faster rate than actually your digest, if you take those rollbacks.
It's a no-brainer as long as everybody keeps spending exactly what they're spending.
Well, we haven't taken it once, or we've taken it once in 10 years.
Y'all don't mind, we need to start wrapping up. So I thought a good way to wrap up, and one thing I want to preempt is Mitchell, I tell you, he don't care to talk to anybody or leave his number, so if y'all have questions, he'll come to a group or whatever, and I suggest each entity take advantage of that, and I'll put 101. But I wanna start to my left, and I'd like to just go around, if anybody's got something they'd like to close with, something they say, a concern, a positive, a negative, whatever, speak your piece. Let's just go around the room. What I don't wanna get into is a debate back and forth, and any, true arguments, so let's just each state our concerns, move around the room, and then each group feel free to contact Mitchell or whoever, and work on the individual. Is that fair, everyone?
Hey Steve, you may have to concern about, we do have a public hearing, the third one tonight, so just want everybody to know, if you do start seeing board members or whatever leave,
Well, that's one reason I want to start tonight, and I'm not gonna, put y'all under time limit, I'll spend 5-10 minutes on it. Just short statement, let's move on. So Chet, do you mind leading us off, sir?
I just want to say.
I thought you said, no, you're not going to. I was thoroughly confused.
I just took too much time. I appreciate Mitchell working on this, and let me tell you, the bottom line is, when it was picked to fund services by property tax, that wasn't a perfect situation, and things need to change. We can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Again, my fear is we have some taxes out there that have to be voted on, and that is my fear. But we can't let fear hold us back from helping property owners, especially senior property owners. I feel like we have an obligation to give relief to those people. We should take every opportunity we can, explore it, study it, and make the best decisions, and then don't look back.
Yeah, Thanks for everybody coming and meeting with us, thank you again, Mitchell, for it. Chuck took most of my time, so I'll wait for that.
Oh, I don't have anything except to say thanks for all your hard work that you put into this.
I'm with the government, and I'm here to help. Thanks, Mitchell, I do appreciate it.
Appreciate Mitchell and everybody's input. If anybody's got any, tax digest questions specifically for me, feel free to reach out at any time.
And I want to say thank you to Ashley, because he's, tolerated me too much.
He agrees.
Mitchell, this was a much more distilled presentation than when we talked about before, so thank you for bringing some clarity to it. And now we're gonna cede our time to our elected officials.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it, and super helpful. Same here, thanks.
Thank you. Mine's not made up yet, but I gotta study some, but we do need to make the right decision for not only our residents, but our commercial businesses too, so, thank you.
I'd still like to see the guardrail in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Say thank you, but I'm still have concerns and confusion and, you know, our loyalty to our taxpayers, I understand that, I appreciate that, but we also have children that we have to kind of think about in the big scheme of things, and we wanna make sure they get a quality education. However we do that, so I appreciate that. And I'm concerned about being the only one in the country to do this. I don't know that that's a good thing, I don't know that that's a bad thing, but it is definitely something to consider.
That's a good point. I also say thank you, and I agree with Susan that, you know, our primary concern is the students of the county, but secondly, I'm concerned about the short timeline where decisions gotta be made. That's kind of like the used car salesman that says, you can have this deal, but you gotta make a decision today. Well, I don't like to do business like that.
I do, again say that I feel like we're very late to this discussion, and, I need time. Because you are asking us to be the guinea pig on this, and in order to, make such a dramatic change in our tax base, it requires a lot of study. And so, I appreciate the time that you took to present the information. I just need time to digest it.
Was that pun? Digested.
No,
I like that.
I'm glad you caught that.
I would like to, just so I'm clear, if cities and county like the idea, because we're more familiar with sales tax outside of East Boston, y'all are, as far as budgetary speaking. The school system can opt out, we'll say, or can still move forward.
Right.
And my question, you don't have to answer it now, I can text you later, but could there be a mechanism to, if these boards decide to move forward, could the school system like stair step in over a couple of cycles? Like, if they're, I'm making a number, let's say if they're 15 meals now, let's say, okay, next year we'll go to 17 meals, and see what that offset looks like. So that would be a question. I'm sure there's a mechanism for it.
And you're absolutely right, and that's what I was trying to stress, is this is just one baseline. When you're talking about a homestead exemption, it's constitutional mandate. Anything can go as long as we're clear to the voter and it doesn't violate the US Constitution. So this is just one plan of where you could staff it, you could create all sorts of different things attached to it. There is some, you wanna be careful with some legal parameters, but yes, you could in some way do it in that manner.
I'm good.
Gentlemen, thank you for your efforts. We're elected to look at bold plans and make decisions to benefit our residents and everyone in the community, our commercial folks. And I think this is definitely a bold plan, and I think it's something that if we decide to pursue it, we would be the model for the country if we were successful.
Correct.
That's the ultimate question. If we're not successful, that's another road I hope we don't pursue.
Not me, this is way over my head.
Mr. Chairman, I have time for two questions, one short. I appreciate you both, but I do have a question, and it goes back to Commissioner Harris's concern with FLOST and how that's
relative to a budget, and then that varies relative to millage. Can the passage or the sunset of FLOST be tied to the successful passage of SPLOST?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so that was all. Now, on the flip side, how is FLOST sustainable if you have an onslaught of residential growth that is gonna qualify if, let's say, 5 years, you hit that residency? How is it sustainable, when you have so much residential growth with that homestead? So you have the services that are required to serve those individuals, and maybe not even commercial. I mean, so can you explain how that is sustainable?
Well, so let's put it this way. Even if you build a house, you're gonna bring in that individual, they're gonna come and they're gonna spend money. They're gonna either spend money in the local community or they're gonna spend money outside the local community. Luckily, Catoosa has a strong commercial base, so it wouldn't matter to make sure that y'all keep millage rates low for your commercial spaces and within not raising taxes after this, but keeping them in the same 20 mill rates. Because it's perpetual, it's an environment. We're talking about all of these things, and for once, and I think all these entities do, or we're once having a joint conversation where we're acting all as one entity. Legal separations, long-term plans, different timetables, absolutely. But where we're all having the same conversation, which is we can plan our growth properly and make sure that all these situations are taken into account. So yes, and that being said, in the entire 25 years of Catoosa County history, you haven't really seen that separation or concerns with all the other sales taxes and with all the other commercial growth. You can see that they do go hand in hand, and it's just about keeping taxes low and growing the economy efficiently and properly, and keeping that power in each of your boards to make sure you're doing that through zoning, through your local acts, and through your local institutions.
Well, this has been very interesting. I still, and I had said that to Stephen, I come out on the side of we have to provide services. We have to educate our children. We can't forget that part, and that all takes money. So, but I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the, I think, 3-year conversation that we've had as it started. And Renzo didn't have to say how old I was, so.
Thank you. I love the trailblazing. I love that. Kudos to y'all, and I think this could be an incredible opportunity for us to all be trailblazers. Not everybody was made to be in a wagon train, so I'm 100% with that. And I also love that it would provide some immediate financial relief, school system aside. I don't know how that will ever work, but I love the trailblazing. I do. Kudos, and thank you both for the work.
Thank you for having me here. It's been fascinating. I've learned a lot today, and I will say that it's rare that I'm ever in a room where all the taxing jurisdictions are represented and a fight doesn't break out. So I that's an amazing thing.
The day you know.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the day is young. So thank you.
No, we get along.
Yeah, everybody gets
I just want to say, thank you to the state representative for the 3 or 4 that came together and thought, try to do this. You know, we may not be there yet today to get this thing out there before November, I don't know, for the school board included. But we as elected officials, we owe it to our citizens to fight each and every day to make a better place for them to live. And that means by reducing their cost of living. So, I'm on board, and if there's anything that we can get it done, let's get it done. If we can't, let's wait till we're all ready for it as a group, as the business leaders of our county. And it may take a little time, but I think we can all come together at the table and get it done if that's what it takes. Maybe not today, maybe in a few years, but hopefully we can get it done.
Richard? You had 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mitchell and Steve, for coming up out of the box thinking too, right? Because we kind of got cut off from where we were wanting to head, and we had to change a few things. You still got a little Charlie Brown teacher there for a minute for a lot of folks, you know, and kind of got a little fuzzy, but good presentation. Deanie, yeah, I hear you, right? Yeah, following your seat, that'd be, especially with your experience, right? I'd definitely be right where you're at, and I appreciate that. Chance, same thing. Yeah, it's tough right now, isn't it, right? So I'm just looking at it from a county and two cities perspective. And Earl, I understand what you're saying. I would speak for myself than to say Costco was at Camp Jordan, I'd still be spending all my money at Costco because Costco offers something that nobody else really has. So that concern doesn't bother me where I think we'll lose revenue necessarily in the county, but, I just want it to be, if we can come together and put this on a November ballot. And I always thought it should be on a general ballot where we get the maximum participation from all the citizens' input if we're gonna vote for a 1 cent sales tax. I'm an advocate for that. But I just think it's important at the end of the day, if it ends up being the county and 2 cities, that we make sure it's equal, taxation relief for both the cities and the county. And as we get into that, that's what I'd be looking at. I don't want it to see an imbalance there. At the end of the day, when I write the check, it's all for one amount, and I get that, but at the end of the day, I wanna make sure that, it's always being spent for property tax relief, and it doesn't end up in a general fund, if that makes sense. And so, that's the only thing I would ask as we go forward, if we do choose to go forward, is we just make sure that happens. But I appreciate everybody for being here, because it is important, and, thank y'all, both cities, for being here, I appreciate it.
So, Lisa, thank you again for taking the time to
Absolutely.
be
Thank you
here.
for having me.
Very beneficial, and, Mitchell and Steve, I wanna thank y'all for offering us a tool, cause that's what this is, it's another tool in our toolbox that gives us options for us to decide what's best for our community. Cause every community is not the same, and, so thank you for that, at least we have a choice, and for sure we'll take it. And in the school system, I was not implying that y'all had to take it, I wanted everybody to hear the same thing that we heard, to where we're all understanding it as best we can. To where there's not a lot of guessing in what other people are saying. So I thank y'all for taking the time to be here, and, again, go back to your prospective boards, your councils, talk with each other. And then, maybe we'll get back together again, we have a short timeline, and maybe it's not for this November. Everyone talk and see, and again, Alicia and I were discussing back and forth. I think there's no way the school could just jump in with this, because that half a year would kill them. Even if y'all wanted to, I think you'd have to get a 2 year delay or a year delay, where there will be some revenue build up and set aside. And what was that you wanted to talk about, the progressive homestead? So maybe.
Oh, if you phased it in, I think, yeah, like you were saying, it could be structured a lot of different ways, so there could be a lot of flexibility in how we do it, it could be phased in.
I can't stress the
For that
flexibility.
first year, right, that first year issue where you just have a few months of FLOST, maybe it could be phased in to address that, yeah.
So there is options, and, I recommend, I know the cities, GMA, feel free to reach out to them. We have our, again, thank y'all for coming, chance, school board, we love y'all.
And we invite everybody to be there.
I'm not